Welcome to About New Haven, a program where we talk to and listen to people who are doing interesting and useful and creative things in and about the New Haven area. My name is Frank Logue. I'm the host of the program, and today my guest is Tom Ficklin, who is the chief editor and the CEO of the Inner City newspaper. Tom, welcome. Glad to have you aboard.
Glad to be here, Frank.
First of all, where were you born and where did you grow up and what was that like?
Well, you say we only have an hour, so I'll try to be a little brief, but I was born in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, home of the Steelers, and more recently home of Johnny Gommage, the guy that was kind of arrested by police, and after the apprehension, kind of wound up dead, and there was a recent march down there. But born in Pittsburgh, lived there until I was 16, and then came up to Connecticut, which was just, I never thought I would be back, but I came to Choate Rosemary Hall. I was in the first ABC class, which stands for A Better Chance. It was a program started in 1963, 1964 to recruit students from urban centers to compete and hopefully attend private schools. So I spent 64 to 67 here in Wallingford, in Connecticut.
How did they find you in Choate Rosemary Hall when you were living in Pittsburgh?
Well, the ABC program, which stands for A Better Chance, is still in existence. It's a nationwide recruiting program to find minority students throughout the United States. And I'm proud to say I was in the first class. So ABC, A Better Chance, had just started. This was the first class, and it still is in existence. And students were recruited through the schools, and the guidance counselors recommended students, and you had to go through the interviews and apply.
So it's a nationwide effort.
Nationwide effort based in Boston. It's another expression of affirmative action, fair and legal affirmative action outreach, if you will.
So when you were in high school in Pittsburgh, somebody in Pittsburgh,
the guidance counselors, sure, the mechanism is for the ABC program to be in touch with guidance counselors, people in the community, just to recommend parents and young people that might have an interest and could be able to compete.
Now tell us a little bit about growing up in Pittsburgh.
Well, as I say, I went to Westinghouse High School, and as I say, 14, 15 when I left Pittsburgh. So a lot of the formative years, I mean, I just was a guy that had fun, played Little League baseball and played Little League sandlot football, and had fun. And my parents were pretty solid community citizens, as they say. Lived across from a church, which I used to go to.
Well, those years of playing ball, I had those years too. Somebody once asked me if, when I was 12, 13, and 14, were my heroes mayors or governors or senators or presidents? I said, no. Joe DiMaggio was my hero.
Sure.
And my world outlook at that time was sports was everything.
Yeah, I can remember now that you mentioned that. Perhaps I was, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 or 8. I'm trying to think the last year that Jackie Robinson played, but I remember my grandfather taking me to see Jackie Robinson at Forbes Field at that time. It no longer exists.
In Pittsburgh, right?
In Pittsburgh. I remember he bought me some baseball uniform to actually wear.
Wow.
It was definitely before Little League. I think Robinson stopped playing in '56.
I'm not sure.
Or '57, so I would have been 7 or 8 at that time. But now that you mention that, sure. But yeah, in terms of heroes at that age, I'm not sure if I really had any heroes per se. Just
in sports or anyplace else?
Yeah, just enjoying life. Maybe my parents, perhaps, but it would be hard-pressed to kind of identify somebody back then.
Sure. And church was a part of your life at that time?
Sure, yeah. Mount Airy Baptist Church. Lived right across the street from the church. My father was involved with the church, head of the men's club, and in fact, I think there's some award that they still have in honor of him when Men's Day comes up every year. I haven't been back in Pittsburgh, haven't lived there since 1963, and even would only visit on school breaks and college breaks, etc. I still have a few friends there, if you follow me, who call me up from time to time and castigate me for not staying in touch with them. Sure, but the Connecticut, New Haven is now more adult home. But wherever you're born, you can't deny that, and I'm proud, as I say, to be born in. But church was certainly an influence.
Sure. Well, I was born in Philadelphia, and most of the people I know in New Haven were not born in New Haven. They were born someplace else. In my case, the other end of Pennsylvania from where you were.
Yes.
And so, when you went to Choate, what did they take you in after 1 year of high school, or what?
I was in the 9th grade, and so I was in the 9th grade at Westinghouse High School, and entered in the fourth form rather, the 4th, 5th, and 6th form. The 4th is equivalent to the 10th grade, so I entered in the 4th form, and I spent 3 years there. some of the students that were selected and identified from the A Better Chance program did have to make up a year, if you will. The testing was pretty rigorous. I can recall taking the test, and even the interview process. Choate alumni interviewed. I remember when I was interviewed when I was maybe, I guess, 14 by a trustee at Choate. I know I'm jumping ahead of the game, but I am now a trustee at Choate myself. This is my 3rd year. So it's the way the circle kind of continues is unique. But that same trustee who interviewed me when I was 14, who now is one of the trustee emeritus, he came up to one of the meetings, and he remembered that interview. I had a vague recollection.
Were you terrified?
Well, you know, at best. I mean, it's just, I remember my father was either there or outside the office kind of thing. You go downtown and go to his big office. A gentleman by the name of Mr. Hunt, who's a pretty well established, the Hunt family in Pittsburgh, and in fact they've given some tennis court complex to the school. But he remembered and I was flattered, you know, that he even remembered that particular episode.
And I've never been to anything with public schools, so I've never had much of a conception of prep school life, and I assume you lived there.
Yeah,
so your life was very different in prep school than it was living.
Sure, that was a great, you know, a major departure. I mean, it's commonplace for a lot of people to do that, or let's say for some, or you know, private schools have been around for a long time. But it was something that my parents were fully supportive of, and at that time, I can't really recall that I had any objection. I think, and quite frankly, I probably even looked forward to it. But yes, it was a boarding school experience. Many of the private schools you can, like Hopkins, for example, you can commute back and forth, and even Choate today, it's Choate Rosemary Hall is the correct name these days because we have merged with the Rosemary Hall School. But yeah, I was a boarder, and I remember entering my room for the first time, which was a single room. Single rooms are typically rare. Normally reserved for sixth form for seniors or juniors, but for whatever reason, let's just say they luck of the draw, I got a single room and not a roommate for that year.
And so how was life in prep school?
Well, in those years, these were 63, 64, 65, 66, 67. I mean, it was a long time ago. The prep schools, private schools have certainly changed in terms of their relaxed code. No more ties, no more mandatory chapel. It was all boys school at that time, and no study hall, and you know, the rules were pretty rigorous then. And so, even if you take away from the fact that there were only 5 black students out of 500 there, even if you just exclude that part, the general atmosphere was one of you know, a very monitored life, if you follow me. For me personally, it had its advantages, and it had its disadvantages.
And what were both of those? What were the advantages and the disadvantages?
Yeah, I've yet to talk to a what we call an ABC alum, because regardless of if I went to Choate or someone went to Exeter or someone went to Taft, we all still feel that we were ABC alums first, rather than the particular school identity. And all of us realized that the potential for psychological damage was great, the potential for social improvement and economic fast-paced, the fast track to economic success was also great. So it's balancing those competing influences, if you will, particularly given those years when you're 14 to 17 in terms of your adolescent development. You know, and all the psychologists talk about how, well, every year of your life is important, but you follow me in terms of your adolescent years in particular, if you feel that you're not being able to commune or bond with folks. I was captain of the basketball team, president of the orchestra, had a lot of you know, kudos or esteem building things I could wear on my shoulder. But in spite of that, psychologically, it was still an isolated experience.
You were 1%, right?
Five out of 500.
So you're 1% of the student body.
Right. It's somewhat different now, of course, for most of the schools, but someone had to. And there were a few black students that had matriculated prior to myself.
So at that age, you realized that, I mean, I don't know whether the world that you lived in Pittsburgh was an integrated life, or was it
lived in East Liberty, which was an integrated section of East Liberty. A few blocks away was more black exclusive, and then the Homewood section was more a black exclusive area. But what's the point that you're trying to share with me?
Well, I'm just wondering how much of a contrast it was from your life in Pittsburgh to your
Oh,
life in this prep
oh
school?
yeah, a stark contrast. I mean, visually, most private schools have that, the Yale type architecture, the Gothic architecture. You know, they're modeled on that European, um,
Pseudo-Gothic?
yeah, pseudo Gothic. They may, you know, obviously a smaller version. So the fortress look, the, the Cambridge kind of look is built in, and then obviously many of the students were wealthier uh, than myself. So yeah, the contrast was great. I can remember coming home and my friends, you know, criticizing my speech patterns and the new languages that I've learned and the new way of speaking. Sure.
And then what happened after Choate?
Then I went on to Bucknell. I went, secured a political a bachelor's of BA in political science from Bucknell University.
Back in Pennsylvania?
Back in Pennsylvania, in Lewisburg. My father was a key influence in that decision. There was a professor that he knew. I can't remember the connection that he knew at Bucknell that had just impressed him so much. Not that my father had gone to Bucknell, but there was some, he knew of this particular gentleman who happened to teach, who had taught there. And he sincerely recommended the school. Was not my first choice. Even to this day, I still feel that I had the grades, if you will, to have been accepted to some other schools. I won't name them, but the chips fell at Bucknell, which is, as you say, in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. And you can see the Lewisburg Penitentiary from the
Really?
main.
I never thought about that.
The main. Jimmy Hoffa was there when I was there, and I worked in the prisons while I was at Bucknell.
Doing what?
A lot of the students, when I say worked, it was more academic field training for credit, counseling inmates, working on a program where some families would come up from Philadelphia and trying to be host to them. It was more like a sociology course where you could get an exposure to the institution as well as an exposure to the parents and mothers and fathers and daughters and sons whose relatives were in those particular facilities.
As a kid growing up in Philadelphia, the first thing I knew about Lewisburg was that it was a penitentiary. It was only later that I learned that there was a college, but when I was a kid, I wasn't thinking about college. I wasn't thinking about the penitentiary either.
Right.
But I knew that there was such a place.
Sure.
And what did you do at Bucknell?
Well, major in political science. At that time, let's see, 67 to 71, the Black Student Union movement was very, very important there. You had Cambodia, you had Vietnam, but the Black Student movement was very. There's always been a Black student movement, but there was this particular period, more recent development. Also, the thrust for Black Studies programs was resurrecting its head again. Some might say even seriously for the first time. So, in addition to just going to class and getting grades and working on graduating, I was head of the Black Student Union for, I guess, 2 years there, and we considered some of our achievements to be the securing of a black house for guys and a black house for ladies, which has now been under some reanalysis by the administration. I'm told when I've gotten some of the Bucknell literature. Didn't play sports. My mind wasn't on sports. I played freshman football, but that was it.
What was your mind on?
Well, again, that period, again, going back to that period of Cambodia, of Black studies, of quality education, the social upheaval in society. It was on social change in a way, trying to relate. But you're so young, so I had a lot of fun. I don't mean to say I was a bookworm all the time, but the Black Student Union, position kept me relatively focused about what you could do and how you work with people and how you can secure your objectives and the various tactics involved there. We also were involved with promoting black art, film, and literature at the campus, bringing in those components. The Alvin Ailey dancers, I can remember booking that group to come in. Native American Studies, there was a professor that influenced me greatly in terms of Native American Studies. I can remember him. My mind was on, I was able to take a number of independent courses that were not offered in the curriculum. Earlier, before the cameras started, we talked about blues a little bit. Right. I was able to do an independent project on blues.
Really?
So
as a college credit course?
Indeed.
That's really having your cake and eating it too.
Well, sure. I mean, well, I suppose. You know, I kind of move so quickly. It seems that sometimes it's difficult for me to reflect on what I'm involved with. But actually one of the reasons I was glad to come on the show, to kind of just take a deep breath and think about what I've been up to.
Well, I think we all need to do that from time to time. And God help those who don't want to think about it or hate to think about it or can't remember it.
Yes. Yes.
So at Bucknell, you were head of the Black Student Union. You were active in the movements of those times, and also had the wonderful opportunity to choose courses that were not written down in the curriculum.
Well, yes, some, and you know, I chose political science deliberately because politics with a small p or large p, just all institutions are political, be it your family to whether it's a government. So it gave me that kind of spread of choice. And again, campuses, then I think we're groping to make the curriculum somewhat, you know, relevant is an overused term, but maybe appealing, let's say, to this, and more experimental. I never have been a science person or a technology person. So
Likewise, I'm sure.
So you know, strictly liberal arts. Even now, as you know, I'm involved with the inner city, and I can remember distinctly while I was at school, in college in particular, when I tried to think about what I wanted to do, I could only think that I wanted to read and write, but it wasn't journalism per se.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the joy and the experience, the pleasure of reading and writing. I wasn't thinking of journalism as a profession back in college, but I knew I was hard-pressed to come up with anything more sophisticated other than saying that I wanted to read and write.
Well, I think
so, you know, now I'm
going to
able
college,
to do it.
if you don't learn to love reading and writing in college,
Right.
then I think you really miss something. Let's go back to the blues for a minute.
Sure.
What is a course in the blues like? Is it listening? Is it learning the history? What is it like?
Well, again, you're stretching my imagination. We're talking back to and my recollection as well. We're speaking back 1968 or so. But the historical, the blues giants, a little biography on them, but also the various blues genres, if you follow me. B.B. King, most of your listeners will be familiar with, and maybe a few others. But B.B., as an example, just represents perhaps in my mind, one tenth of the blues spectrum.
Right.
So much, and WPKN plays a lot of real blues, if you follow me, Mississippi Delta blues, that you won't hear. These particular blues artists you will not hear at Foxwoods or elsewhere. But it's the relationship of the blues and what that indicates in terms of our social mores and social strife. And really the angle was the blues were representing sermons, if you will, messages of that time, and we still have the blues today. So that's, I think that's what makes the blues genre so eternal. And B.B. has a new book out, by the way. B.B. King, 70 or so years old. He has a new book out talking about his life and his experience. So
I saw him recently at Oakdale, and then a couple of years ago, over at Toads, they had Buddy Waters singing.
Muddy Waters, Buddy Guy came in. Sure. So those are some of the people that I had a chance to. The list, it wasn't as much listening as just reading about them. And a good friend of mine, Ralph Metcalf Jr., the son of Ralph Metcalf Sr., who was the congressperson from Chicago, one of the first black congresspeople before the Voting Rights Act, from Chicago, and he was a Choate. He was a senior at Choate when he was in the 12th grade when I was in the 10th grade. We call them forms, but not to confuse your audience. We always stayed in touch, so I was able to kind of correspond with him, and he was able to send me a lot of literature. And when I would see him, even after graduation, when I would go to Chicago, we'd go to some of the blues clubs. And
I sat in on a music course recently, and at the end of it, somebody said, I like having to like Baroque music and Mozart, people like that. Somebody said, who's your favorite 20th century composer? I said, W.C. Handy is my favorite 20th century composer.
And after they said who, then what did you have to say?
Well, I said it was W.C. Handy.
Yeah, but after they said who, W.C. who, or they necessarily
this is a guy who knew music.
Oh, he knew music. Okay.
But I think he was a little surprised at that. But I have a record called Louis Armstrong Plays W.C. Handy. And he's got Memphis Blues, Beale Street Blues, St. Louis Blues, and about 9 others.
Yes. Well, I know this is citizen television. You're not supposed to give a commercial, but as you may or may not know, Wynton Marsalis is coming in January.
I know.
Here
for the Martin Luther King.
For the Martin Luther King, and presenting with the New Haven Symphony. And so when you hear Wynton talk about Louis Armstrong and W.C. Handy. I think that Wynton's popularity, separate and apart from his musical genius, is that he's a musical educator and that he acknowledges, you know, the path that he's on and the giants that have
Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, he spoke at Morse College about 8 or 9 years ago, and I had the privilege of hearing him. And he spoke for about 20 minutes about people in jazz, and then he said, and he particularly talked about Louis Armstrong. And then one of the students said, wasn't Louis Armstrong, you know, primarily kind of a pop figure? And he sort of wheeled and turned around and pointed his finger. He said, all of us who follow Louis Armstrong derive from him, all of us. I don't mean just trumpet players, we all do. And he gave about a 10-minute lecture on where Louis Armstrong is in the pantheon of music in this country. And it was very moving. So I'm going to be there, you can bet your life.
Yes, indeed. As you say, it's
at that
fundraiser for the Q House. I believe the tickets have to be purchased at the Q House. But even that student's comment was not totally accurate, because that student probably just saw Louis on TV with the handkerchief and just singing in a movie, and before his, you know, he didn't have that mass media, if you will, exposure when he really was composing and playing.
So now you're at Bucknell, and you graduate from Bucknell, and what happened then?
Well, believe it or not, the Connecticut connection reared its, let's say, beautiful head or ugly head, depending on your perspective. I came here to the Divinity School. Came in '71, and I can recall while at Bucknell looking at various graduate school bulletins and information, etc., thinking about law school, thinking about School of Social Work. I think it was my sister or someone suggested the Divinity School. A good friend from Pittsburgh, Joe Allen, who was maybe second or third command in the National Urban League movement, was a YDS grad, as I recall. But the Divinity School catalog attracted me. I think this gets back to even what we were talking about when I was an undergrad, because as you know, you have your field-based courses that if you're if you don't want to pursue the religious career, you still must get out into the world and do something.
Right.
And hopefully that something has some moral impact or social uplift impact. So, and knowing that students came to the Divinity School not having to declare their particular faith in anything, and I fell into that category. I did not go with any intentions of becoming a minister, but knowing that I could still, in full faith, apply and be an authentic student there.
Right. Yeah, you're not second class there
not
just because you're not going to be a
Indeed.
minister.
And I must admit that it attracted me, just as we're talking about it now, because of the opportunity to take courses outside the Divinity School.
Right.
So to make a long story short, I took courses in the it's school now, I guess, School of Organization Management, then School of Administrative Sciences. Well, they had an earlier incarnation as Administrative Sciences, School of a lot of teamwork and group Tavistock sessions and teamwork group building. Took courses over at Connecticut Mental Health Center, took a course at the law school. So the chance, I saw that Divinity School entree to be a chance to really sample the university per se, the various professional schools, and still take your requisite number of Divinity School courses that could give you the moral grounding. And so the history, the religion courses that I took were more, yes, you had to take New Testament and Old Testament, but my perspective was that this was just another body of literature, certainly a body of literature that's lasted a long time, but nonetheless the history of a lot of the religious text. And again, a lot of the courses you could take at the Divinity School, even they're separate apart from courses at the law school or courses elsewhere, were rather creative. So I remember taking a course, a video course on religious a video course on TV ministry, but just using the power of the media and how that influenced people's perceptions, etc. I remember taking that. I remember taking a course on Black economic church development, which is still something that's not as powerful as it can be.
I'll tell you the interesting parallel. I went to Yale for 1 semester, then I went into the military for 2.5 years. And when I came back, I had a whole different view. When I was 18 years old, I didn't realize what was available to me as a Yale student. So I looked around and I said, who are the great teachers around here? And I took their courses. And you seem to have understood when you went to the Divinity School that the university was kind of a big garden, and you could look at this part of the garden and that part of the garden. We're going to have to take a break in a minute. We can follow up with this and then get on to your career. But it's an interesting thing that at that time, just coming here, you had a sense that you weren't going to confine yourself to that part of the garden. You were going to look at other parts of the garden. We'll be talking more, not so much about the garden, but what it is that our guest is how he got from being in divinity school to where he is now. We're going to take a little break now, so stick around.
To be an organ and tissue donor, you must tell your family now so they can carry out your decision later. Call 1-800-355-SHARE for your free brochure.
Our neighborhood isn't the prize winner or the best in the United States. Our neighborhood isn't the main course that's served on a dinner plate. Our neighborhood's like a leftover from what was the best. The loyal people in our neighborhood aren't the ones who are best dressed. The drug dealers in our neighborhood, they don't care about anyone else. They just care about getting money and looking good, all wrapped up in themselves. For now, we're stuck in this neighborhood. Someday we'll move someplace else. We gotta look back, forth, left to right, just to look out for ourselves. If you're sick and tired of your neighborhood, don't get quiet like a lot of us do. Open your mouth and you shall be heard. Someday your dream may come true.
Be part of the solution. For information on what you can do to help stop drugs in your community, call New Haven is Fighting Back at 787-8445.
Welcome back to About New Haven. Today we're talking with Tom Ficklin, who's the editor-in-chief of Inner City. And Tom has told us about his early life and education. And before the break, he was telling us about life at the Divinity School. So let's carry on from there.
Great.
What happened? What happened when you finished Divinity School?
Well, I can recall distinctly the same dilemma that I had at the senior year in Bucknell about knowing what to do next and trying to explore my options. I do remember that distinctly. This show is fascinating because it makes me think about things I haven't thought about in a while. I remember I didn't know what I wanted to do when I guess graduation was in May or early June. It was late as April, still didn't have a clue. I had taken a lot of field-based courses at the legal aid. I worked at the legal aid. I did some alcoholic counseling as one of the field-based courses. Worked with Reverend Edmonds, I can remember with Reverend Edmonds, and even that was unique because we interviewed people in his congregation at home to kind of talk about how they perceived Reverend Edmonds vis-a-vis his political activities. I think at that time he was perhaps head of the Board of Education or CPI, versus how his perception of his ministry external to the church related to them whether they were being ministered to as a congregation. So it was a focus group in essence. Myself and Reverend Streets, who now is a chaplain at Yale. I remember we were, and one or two other Yale Divinity School students were involved with us. But so I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I remember either seeing a job posting for the Urban League here in New Haven, and so I applied for that position. Still had not committed to staying in New Haven or not. My first wife, we were married in our summer after graduation from Bucknell, so she came to Divinity School as well. So I was a married student here at YDS. She transferred, she started in the Divinity School program and then moved to another program, religious studies, for the PhD program here at Yale. So I was kind of committed to staying in New Haven, although she could have transferred elsewhere. Make a long story short, applied for the Urban League position, and it was a position for Project Seek Out at that time. In fact, when you were in City Hall, you helped the fund. As I recall, you helped the fund one year. I remember Gene Cherry and I coming to chat with you about some emergency funding, given some federal cutbacks or something of that nature. So the Seek Out program I stayed with, and then that developed into more of a health and education program for the New Haven Urban League. Unfortunately, we don't have an Urban League here in New Haven, but that's another reason for another show.
And after you worked at the Urban League?
Well, yeah, in the interest of time, worked, because we do want to talk a little bit about the inner city. I mean, that's maybe of most relevance to your audience. Stayed with the Urban League for 3 years, and then worked in personnel, human resources now, but personnel for 10 years, for Columbia Pictures, for Reader's Digest, for Golf Digest Tennis, up until '86.
In the communications business?
Well, and all of them in a way where Reader's Digest, definitely communications business, definitely Columbia Pictures communication business, Golf Digest Tennis, publishing business, although and owned by the New York Times. They still are. Golf Digest Tennis magazine are owned by the New York Times company. So when people ask me to reflect on my experiences and how I got to working with the paper, and when I think about the opportunities that I've had, there's been some synergy and some connection. But yeah, definitely in the communication businesses and in corporate America, and in volatile industries as well. took 2 years off and reached the typical when you're 39, 40, trying to decide what you want to do with life when you grow up.
Right.
And so I started becoming like an entrepreneur, marketing other people's products and services. I took a few years off to try to define my own marketing firm, and saw the first edition of the Inner City back in September of '90, and thought that John Thomas Jr. started the paper. His father, by the way, is a New Haven resident and had a paper called Harambe News here in New Haven. So
Oh, yeah.
John kind of grew up. You may remember John Thomas Sr. and Youth Business Enterprises in the Dixwell area.
Right.
So John grew up, my partner grew up under his father's tutelage in terms of the production aspect of the business, as well as giving back to the community.
Right.
So I saw the first edition, called John, thought I could help him with some marketing, opening some doors, helping him sell ads, helping him position the paper, etc. Had no intention of being involved with it full time, because
Right.
again, this was just the
You're
first
gonna be
edition.
one of your clients,
Be
more or less.
one of my clients, and the rest is now we're into our 7th year of publication.
And the publication is called Inner City.
Sure, you can.
And here it is. This is the post-election issue in November. And I want to get to the question on the front page, but your position as editor-in-chief, is that something that you became over time or became right away?
I think for the first 6 or 7, I call myself chief cook and bottle washer even still, and people will still see me around town delivering the papers and kind of the Tom Peters walk around and see what's going on kind of philosophy. And I still take out the garbage from time to time. So I think after 4 or 5 months, John and I we promoted ourselves. We've always had high expectations for the paper and high aspirations. Although when people found out back in the late 90s and early 1991 that they would say, are you really doing this full time? They would ask this almost incessantly, is this something you can do full time? And my wife perhaps still poses that question. But so I guess after 4 or 5 months, I gave myself a promotion.
Okay, I'm going to hold up the paper again because I don't think we got it right. But go ahead.
Free commercials are great. We distributed in New Haven, Waterbury, Bridgeport, and even now in Hartford. And in '97, we will start publishing weekly. Up until this last May, from 1990 to this past April, May, we printed once a month. Then we started printing twice a month, and we hope to publish weekly in '97.
Okay, and here's the paper we're talking about. It's called Inner City, and this is the post-election November issue. So you've gone from monthly to twice a month, and
God willing, weekly. Yeah.
97, you're going to be weekly. One thing I noticed, by the way, in going through it, is that you have very considerable advertising. So it appears to me to fulfill one of the necessities of life in running a newspaper, and that is you have to have serious amount of advertising.
The business operation is a mainstay, and the reason that many publications fail or do not last as long as they would like is because of not really having a strict business focus versus an ideological focus. You know, many people want to start something because they want to get their message out, and not realize that you have to interact with the marketplace, being your consumers and your advertisers. We've been blessed in terms of our advertising base, and we think also we've been blessed with still able to have a strong editorial voice as well. We still do not have as many ads as we need, but we're, in contrast to many other publications, we do have we have ads, but this is a very expensive business, as you know. Typically it's 5 years or so before you can begin to make money, and that's a typical paradigm. We have taken the opposite approach, that really from the first, second, third, fourth edition we had to make money. So all of us, my partner wears 5 hats, John Thomas Jr. wears 5 hats, I wear at least 5, my assistant Diane Payton wears 5, Dolores Aline wears 5, so it's a typical small business, but people realize that your job description is varied and numerous, and
there's nobody who says, oh, you're short, you need about $50,000. There's nobody around to provide that, right?
Well, there are certainly people around to provide it. We hope to have some investor meetings in '97, and we wanted to wait until we had established a track record of quality before we make that. But yeah, there are people that have approached us from time to time, independent venture capitalists, as well as some of the more I won't say mainstream papers, but let's say daily papers.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about this issue, which I picked up, I think, at the Edge of the Woods Market.
Indeed. We drop off at schools,
Whaley
churches,
Avenue.
clubs, bars.
And it says,
churches.
we have lost the election, can we win the election? We meaning, I suppose, the black community.
We have lost the election, but can we win the battle?
Can we win the battle? So
or
who is we? I guess that's
the
the first
we.
question.
We believe very strongly in metaphors, the power of a metaphor. We believe very strongly in that. We believe that the we, for a person to read it and decide, are you part of that we or not? That we don't self-select who our readers should be. We, quite frankly, think that our product deserves to be read by really everyone, regardless of your ethnicity. We really think that our product is appealing to people that are curious, analytical, regardless of your age, and want to explore and seek out information that you're not going to find elsewhere. So, for example, our white readers, and we were tremendously proud of our non-black, our non-Hispanic readers, we quite frankly feel that they can learn as much, if not more, than from reading the paper as our so-called loyal, black community base. So we really strongly believe that it gets me into controversy sometime about whether we're a black paper or white paper or red paper or yellow paper. We're a black paper, but we're more than a black paper. I often ask people, is Oprah Winfrey's show a black show?
Fair enough.
John Johnson at Ebony, everybody should be reading Ebony magazine, particularly given the crisis in our society today in terms of race relations and church bombings and the recent situation in Wallingford with the menorah. I guess, I'm not sure when this show is airing, but there's been a recent threat about the menorah in Wallingford and the Milford KKK situation. But Texaco, the list is endless, and regardless of when this would be taped, there'd be something else we could talk about, unfortunately.
One thing I felt sure of, Tom...
So when I said we have lost, I was specifically referring to the fact that Dole did receive more white votes than Clinton.
Right.
And I want people to be aware of that. So what does that mean about how did Clinton win and why did he win? So to repeat, Dole received more white votes than Clinton did. So because we are, a black paper, we're always it's important for us to convey the power, the substance of the ethnic communities and how they interact with the overall political universe, if you follow me, not only domestically but internationally.
Right. One thing I was sure of when I said we have lost the election was that we didn't mean the Republican Party.
The Republicans won the election. The Republicans won this election, in our opinion, certainly with retaining the Senate, retaining the House, retaining Newt. They won. They clearly retaining the seats, the chairperson seats. It was a masterstroke to run Dole, in our opinion, a masterstroke to run Dole, because I mean, you knew people. Clinton was going to win the presidency because people were just the lack of faith in the political system. We know about the low turnout. So Clinton was a shoo-in, in our opinion, in terms of winning. So you don't want to waste too much money, and Dole gets a nice chance to his last hurrah. You give him the credit, he gets a chance to go out there. But in my mind, it was a masterstroke to run Dole, and in our opinion, the Republicans have won. Ralph Reed is claiming victory, George Will is claiming victory, and they're on solid ground at the moment. Particularly if you factor in the fact that Clinton is really not a Democrat anymore, but he's a new characterization. Perhaps he's a Lindsay. We say in this article that Clinton is a Lindsay Republican. Some people might not remember John Lindsay from New York, or Rockefeller Republican, but certainly not a Democrat.
Well, I obviously have different views. For example, that the Republicans knew they were going to lose and offered up Dole when they knowing they were going to lose.
That they sacrificed the presidency. That they sacrificed the presidency so they can retain the House.
But we differ on that.
Yeah.
For example, the Republicans announced what kind of people they would put on the Supreme Court when they elected the president, and that's an election we didn't lose. Question. And when I say we, I mean liberals, one of which I remain and have been all my life. The kind of people that would have been on the Supreme Court for the next 30 years if the Republicans had won was, if people had no other reason to vote Democratic, and I met some people who were very angry at Clinton, I would tell them, think about the Supreme Court. Think about the kind of people Dole would put on. So from that point of view,
I used to believe in that thought, but our contention, and we say this in this article, and that's why it's so good to chat with you, is that because of Clinton's tilt to the right, and because of the control of the Republicans of the House and the Senate, Clinton will not be able to nominate anyone that will have the liberal agenda that we would want to see in for judicial appointments. So our audience should look into, should pay attention to the judicial appointments. I think we're both saying, and our speculation is that Clinton will not nominate anyone because he knows that they will not, a liberal judge or an activist judge will not be able to pass the confirmation process. The Borks of the world are still very much out there.
Well, the Borks of the world would not get nominated by Clinton, of course.
Yes, but I'm talking about the Judge Bork mentality, the Judge Bork influence, the people that believe in that mindset, the Clarence Thomases of the world, the Judge Scalias of the world. So that's why we say when we have lost that even in terms of Supreme Court nominations, we're not going to find a judicial activist nominated in the same way that Lonnie Guinier was cast asunder because Clinton did not want to fight that battle, the same way that Harris Foster was cast aside. In fact, I don't even think we even have a Surgeon General, do we? I don't think we even have. We haven't had one for a year and a half. I mean, so you had Jocelyn Elders kicked to the curb, as the kids would say. You had Dr. Jocelyn Elders forced to resign. Then you had Dr. Foster not passing scrutiny under the confirmation process. And I don't think we've had a Surgeon General since that time. That's why we say we've lost, because Clinton has, when you have these health issues affecting the minority community so progressively, almost from a Holocaust standpoint, not even have a Surgeon General appointment. So,
well, I think that the spectrum is broader than that.
But I do say that the battles are still to be fought. So I don't.
Oh, there are a lot of battles, right. and we'll find out over time what kind of people get nominated for the Supreme Court.
Indeed.
But Clarence Thomases and Anton Scalia's will not be nominated by President Clinton. So the spectrum is not just one and another. There's a range.
I hope.
And if
part of me hopes so.
Well, if the Republicans had been nominated, they would have been in the far right spectrum only.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now they're going to be somewhere in the middle, probably.
Yes, but that's a minor trade-off in terms of the stalemate in terms of progressive legislation, in my opinion, that we're going to see. There's still for Clinton to adopt a balanced budget, which is a Republican proposal, and the balanced budget is not only not needed, but many of the economists who I believe in talk about the folly of it. So we could chat more, but about this. Definitely.
So how do you see, how is the paper doing? How is Inner City doing?
Year
7? Is this now year 7?
This past September, we celebrated our 6th anniversary. I like to talk about that we're now into our 7th year, because we always really believe that we are still constantly evolving and growing. So we're into our 7th year. Excited to be here. Like every business, I suggest in New England, we still, in spite of Todd Martin spoke recently to the Chamber of Commerce talking about the Connecticut indicators are up, but people that I speak with still say that it's a tough environment, and that the criteria for success these days for any business, in my opinion, is if your lights are still on. I don't mean to be somber, but profit margin is a ludicrous thing to talk about. Most people that I know, black, white, red, green, yellow, are talking about if you're still open for business, that you are a success.
You survived.
If you still are surviving, literally, if you are able to open that door the next day. We are very optimistic about what we're involved with, because we think people are really more curious, more aggressively seeking information that you won't find in some of the daily papers or in some of the mass media magazines. And that advertisers, I think, are also trying to reach people that have an interest. When you pick up our paper, you do, if I don't feel this way, no one's going to feel this way. I think that people stay with it. That there's a relationship between the reader interest of something you read, and then you're being able to incorporate the message of that ad, if you follow me.
Right, and you have banks and you have automobile agencies, so you have a wide spectrum of advertising.
Sure. I mean, we're extremely proud of the institutional clients, if you will, versus the small businesses, if you will, versus the nonprofit world, if you will, the entertainment world. We're exceptionally proud of that spectrum of advertising support. I mean, we are a free paper, and similar to most community papers, so yeah, we're 3,000% dependent upon strong business support of all varieties, and we spend a lot of time talking to our advertisers, and we like to use the term advertiser partners, quite frankly, and even investors, because they are literally investing in us. It might be a short-term investment, although many of our advertisers have been with us almost from our inception, so our investors, we really take very seriously.
You're going to be weekly. We have another weekly in town called The Advocate. How would you characterize the relationship or the distinction between your paper and The Advocate?
Oh yeah, they talk about on their masthead being an arts and entertainment weekly. I mean, that's pretty clear, and we are more than an arts and entertainment weekly. We like to think that we're kind of like almost a Reader's Digest, that you can find international news, local news, state news, domestic news, articles on Australia, articles on West Haven, articles on Bridgeport. So they are arts and entertainment weeklies are very popular. There's an advocate clone in every major city. Literally, I'm not trying to disparage the advocate, but that format and that design, you'll see these arts and entertainment weeklies, and they have a community, a nationwide professional group. We see ourselves to be really a news and information service versus just entertaining. And that's not to say that one should not be entertained, but we see ourselves to be also more, I mean, Paul Bass and others that write for them, I respect their journalistic skills, but we have a clear, whether something is an editorial, a commentary, or a article. Some of the arts and entertainment weeklies, you can't really decide, if you read it, if this is a researched article or a person's opinion. So I don't think, so there are a number of differences, but we don't really, if you were to ask us who our competitors are, I would suggest to you that our competitors are life in general. It's TV, it's tennis, it's playing golf, it's sex, it's eating food. To read versus doing something else, our competition is a lifestyle competition. We really see that when someone reads our paper, we're very pleased because they could be doing a multitude of other things. So our competition is life in general, not the Bridgeport Post or the Connecticut Post, not the USA Today, not the internet, but everything of life. So to break through all that clutter is a major challenge.
Yeah, I would say if that view of the competition is an interesting and a challenging one. It's whatever else people are doing in their lives.
Whatever else, because when you read, you have to stop. You have to stop to read versus something. I mean, you can read and drive or read and drink, but or read in the bathroom.
Better not read and drive.
Well, but I mean, at a stoplight, as I often do. But you understand my point. We really have that mindset about what our competition is. It's breaking into. Our goal is to addict people to the paper, and I like to use these words because every word can have a positive and negative meaning. It just depends on how it's symbolized. We like to think that our paper can be an addiction, a necessary addiction.
Yeah, addiction. I'm addicted to tennis, and there are people who are addicted to gardening, and people who can be addicted to things that are good for them and even good for others.
Yes.
So you want people to get hooked on inner city.
We want people to get hooked, but also to hook us, because it's a very interactive still of experience. So as we grow and offer information, we receive feedback on the quality of that information, and that helps us to reciprocate and to share even better information. So it's a cycle and a connectivity.
How do you get the feedback from your readers?
People write, they call, they will drop by the office. I mean, certainly our telephone number is 387-0354, and my direct extension is 203. We go to a lot of various meetings. We host organizations and will come to our offices to host their various meetings, nonprofit groups. You mentioned tennis groups have met at our grassroots tennis program, has met at our office. The Urban League, when it was here in New Haven, used to hold meetings in our office for their health fair. The National Council of Negro Women has held meetings in our office. The network marketing groups have held meetings in our office. So we are a paper, and every 2 weeks, and hopefully in January we'll have a weekly exposure to people. But above and beyond marketing the paper, we have an interface, a direct interface with people, given the activities that we're involved with. We also co-sponsor events from time to time.
So you, in addition to publishing this paper, you interact with the community in the various ways you describe, which is an interesting thing for a newspaper to do. I don't think of newspapers as doing that.
We were talking earlier on about our mission statement, and that we see ourselves to be more than a newspaper. We see ourselves to be an information community service network, with all that implies, and with all that we don't even know that implies, because with the revolution in communication technology. But yeah, we pride ourselves in not just sitting in the office writing something. We like to think that activists has become kind of a cliche term. Interactive. Part of it, I think, is based on my perhaps going to Choate, perhaps going to divinity school, just having a lot of experiences that realize that the communication and the communion with every aspect of society is very important. I'm on a number of boards, which I don't say I don't say to boast about, but just there are additional opportunities to participate in New Haven on a substantive basis.
I think that's one of New Haven's strengths, by the way, that New Haven has a vast number of nonprofit organizations and boards which, particularly in recent years, have had a wide spectrum of more diverse membership than they used to have.
Yes.
They used to be the city's Yankee do-gooders primarily, and now it's lots of
Well,
other folks.
there still is a need for, you could talk to some of my friends, and there still is a need for more, regardless of the composition of the particular boards, more effectiveness in terms of the organizational operations. But one of my goals is to, one of my goals is to see that whatever organization I'm involved with, and there are a few, are more effective, because we always can be more effective.
You have a small library of books that you brought with you here. Why did you do that?
Well, I brought them deliberately to indicate that even if you don't read our paper, there are things that should be read. And because we are just a paper and cannot print as many pages as we would like, that if you're addicted to information, I guess to say it that way, we see ourselves to be no more than a literacy program. Mm-hmm. If people want to ask what your business is, we're a literacy program. So read, read, read. But it also keeps us grounded in terms of what is our mission. I mean, the first black paper technically started in 1827. I say technically because who knows if there wasn't anything before 1827. It started by two men, and there are over 200 black papers now nationwide. But that's just a small spectrum. So if you don't read us, read Emerge magazine, or read Essence, or read Black Enterprise, etc. This book in particular, I'm not sure which camera would pick it up.
Whichever has a light on now.
Was printed around 1815, and it was a response.
People may not be able to. We better say the title.
The title is An Inquiry Concerning the Intellectual and Moral Faculties and Literature of Negroes by a Frenchman. But this is a reprint, but it was initially printed in 1815, and it was really designed to respond to a lot of the academic debate at that time vis-a-vis Africans' so-called inferiority and their capacity to be legally classified as men. We walked down memory lane a lot in the paper and in my own thinking, because we believe there's a strong connection between what has happened in the past and what is happening currently. This book is just an example of something that's been reprinted. Another book I brought in was from something called Shades of Freedom by Leon Hickenbottom. Some of your listeners might recognize Judge Hickenbottom's name. Most recently, he's been retained by Texaco to assist them with their problem. But he also teaches at Harvard and was formerly a judge, and we were talking about Supreme Court judges before. Here's a gentleman that did not become a Supreme Court judge because of political reasons. You know, I'm biased, but I like to lay my biases out on the street and people to debate to me. But at any rate, Judge Hickenbottom talks about the American judicial system really being based on juxtaposing the inferiority of black people versus the superiority of whites, and he talks about this from going back to 1690 to before 1776, and so he looks at jurisprudence from a legal historian point of view, and he just sees that the conflict and the connection between black and white and oppressed and non-oppressed and slaves and free being the undercurrents of how our judicial system has operated. So this theory about natural law he doesn't really subscribe to. He sees law to be, you know, just another extension of philosophy that can be enforced.
Well, I regret to tell you that we've come to the end of our hour. I would say to people who are listening and watching, if you are interested in getting information about maybe about the history of black people or black authors, and you don't happen to know who some of them might be, probably if you stopped at the offices of Inner City, you could look at a large shelf full of books and decide which ones you ought to buy and take home for yourself. I thank you for that and for coming here, Tom. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you, Frank. I enjoyed it.